Hello family, happy Monday. Excuse the look. I usually record these videos after my early morning workouts, so this is real life. So glad you are catching the replay of this video. If you can be so kind and type in hashtag replay so I'll know that you are watching. And we are going to be going through lesson 4 this week of Secrets of the Secret Place by Bob Sorge. I never know if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. And you can find any of the previous lessons by going to the top of the group, clicking on the topics tab, and then selecting Secrets of the Secret Place, and then the past lessons will show up. So again, we're on lesson 4, and lesson 4 is the secret of radical obedience. And if you're catching this video for the first time, there are literally 52 chapters in this book. So I like to slowly read through it, reading one chapter at a time, so that way we can apply what it is that we've learned in a lesson. I don't feel like there's any need to speed read through this book. We can just kind of camp out and spend some time here in the secret place. All right, so the secret of radical obedience. Hearing God in the secret place is one of the greatest keys to the overcoming Christian life. However, it must be linked with this corollary radical obedience. We hear and then we do. We hear and then we do. We hear and then we take action. But be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. And that's James 1:22. By radical obedience, I mean immediate obedience that fulfills the commandment to its fullest measure. One thing I've learned is that delayed obedience is disobedience. So what we are going to be practicing is radical obedience, which is the same as immediate obedience. Radical obedience does not seek to comply to the minimal standards, but pursues extravagant, lavish fulfillment. If Jesus says, sell all, then we sell all immediately. Someone type that in the comments. And that's why I'm excited that we're spending our time here, because again, we get to put this into practice this week. All right. The New Testament word for obedience, hupako, is a compound word of two Greek words, hupo, under, and okapo. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, which means to hear. So to obey is to hear under. Obedience involves listening attentively with a heart of compliant submission and then obeying his word. Implicit obedience starts for every one of us, not in doing good works, but in sitting at his feet and hearing his word. Devotion to the secret place is the saints' first great act of obedience. Jesus revealed this in Mark chapter 3, verses 33 through 35. But he answered them, saying, who is my mother or my brother? And he looked around in a circle at those who sat about him and said, here are my mother and my brothers, for whoever does the will of God is my brother and my sister and mother. The will of God, and that meant was for the people to sit at Jesus's feet and hear his word. Until you attend to this responsibility first, you will be constantly frustrated in your inability to uncover the joys of radical obedience. Works of service gain their spiritual energy from the furnace of a fiery love relationship at Jesus' feet. The true fulfillment of serving Jesus is discovered when we get first things first. First, we sit and listen, and then we go and do. We sit and listen, and then we go and do. My friend Steve Peglow once told me he thought some people were common law Christians. By that he meant they want the benefits of living with Jesus without making the commitment. That was so good. As many times as I read this, I get something out of it every time. But even as the full joy of living together is found only within the context of the commitment of marriage, so too the joy of following Jesus is found only in abandoning oneself to every word that proceeds from his mouth. Some people put their best energies into creative thinking. However, God has a way of negating the plans of men. The Lord brings the counsel of the nations to nothing. He makes the plans of the people of no effect. The counsel of the Lord stands forever. And that's Psalm 33, verses 10 through 11. Instead of focusing on being creative, focus on being obedient. Instead of focusing on being creative, focus on being obedient. And that will be our declaration for this chapter. I declare that instead of focusing on being creative, I will focus on being obedient. I declare that instead of focusing on being creative, I will focus on being obedient. Give your best energies to waiting on God in his presence, listening to his voice, and then moving out into action only when he has spoken. And that's what's so hard. Sometimes we go and try to get ahead of God, right? There's no sense in coming up with your own ideas when it's only God's counsel that will stand. I'm saying it several different ways. The key is in hearing and obeying. Oh, what joy to hear his word and do it. The benefits are profound. I will mention only a few among many. So some of the benefits are: obedience unlocks eternally obedient life. Jesus said, I know that his command is everlasting life. Coming from the master of understatement, these simple words contain far more impact than a cursory reading would reveal. Take that statement to your place of meditation and let him awaken you to the life-giving power of extravagant adherence to his command. The life that resides in him flows into you when you obey. Another benefit: obedience incurs the gaze of God. God looks with special interest and affection upon the one who is devoted to obedience. He said it this way, but on this one will I look, on him who is poor of a contrite spirit and who trembles at my word. It is fantastic to just imagine it. You're in the secret place with his word before you, and you're trembling at the prospect of his speaking to you. He sees your willing spirit and conceives of ways to honor your devotion. Wow, that's so amazing. To tremble at his words mean, firstly, that we long for him to speak, and secondly, that we tremble with ready diligence to act upon the word that comes. When we tremble for his word with this kind of keen anticipation, he fastens his gaze upon us in order to do good on our behalf. Another benefit is obedience produces greater intimacy. In my opinion, one of the most powerful statements Jesus made on earth is right here. He who has my commandments and keeps them, it is he who loves me, and he who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I will love him and manifest myself to him. And that's in John 14:21. Jesus said, obedience is the proof of love, and love brings us into incredible intimacy with the Father. Furthermore, obedience unlocks the affections of Christ and is self-disclosure to the human heart. There's nothing more I long for than for Jesus to manifest himself to me. For the hope of beholding him, I will embrace any and every command of his mouth. I choose to obey, not because I am energized by watching my obedience change people's lives, but because his presence is so sweet when I obey. My heart is inflamed with zeal for his closeness, and obedience only fuels that fire. And another benefit is obedience builds unshakable foundations. A scripture reference is Matthew 7, verses 24 through 27. Which reads, therefore, whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them, I will liken him to a wise man who has built his house on the rock. And the rain descended, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house. And it did not fall, for it was founded on the rock. But everyone who hears these sayings of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain descended, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, and it fell. And great was its fall. You will notice that the storm comes both to those who do Jesus' sayings and those who do not do them. No one is exempt, neither you nor me. Storms are most certainly headed your way. The only question is, Will you survive? Will your foundations be strong enough to sustain the winds and the floods? Those who walk in radical obedience have made themselves ready for the storm. I need you to say, I am ready for the storm. And they will overcome. Oh, that you had heeded my commandments, then your peace would have been like a river and your righteousness like the waves of the sea. And that was Isaiah 48:18. The greater the winds that assault the obedient, the more his righteousness rises up like mighty barriers, crashing on the shore in majestic thunderings of fragrance to God. Of course, there are many other benefits of obedience beyond these 4 that I just cited, but I am trying to keep our chapters in this book short. Consider just 2 other brief thoughts yet regarding obedience. The first comes to us through Mary, the mother of Jesus. Mary gave us one of the greatest summations of obedience. What he says to you, do it. John 2:5. True servants are found sitting at Jesus' feet. Where I am, where my servant will also be. Where I am, there my servant will also be. John 12:26. Then when he speaks, they just do it. Servants don't try to give the master a better idea. Servants don't complain that they think the task is stupid. Servants don't try to decide if they're in the mood to do it right now. Servants don't decide if the task is within their dignity to perform it. They just do it. So likewise, when you have done all those things which you are commanded, say, we are unprofitable servants. We have done what was our duty to do. And that's Luke 17:10. The closer you get to God, the more obedient you must be. Some choose the level of obedience whereby they endeavor to avoid sin and choose righteousness. That was the level where the children of Israel who knew God's acts lived. Moses, however, knew God's ways. So Moses' level of obedience was of necessity much higher. The issue for Moses was no longer simply, is this action right or wrong? The issue was what is God's command? For example, when Moses was on the fiery mountain, the command was, stay behind the cleft of the rock, because if you come out from behind the protective rock and see my face, you'll die. You're so close to me right now, Moses, that if you make one wrong move, you'll see my face and have a cardiac arrest on the spot. Now, is there anything wrong or sinful about stepping out from behind a wall of rock? No, but when you're that close to God, it's imperative you follow his instructions to the letter and stay where he's putting you. It bears repeating. The closer you get to God, the more obedient you must be. The closer you get to God, the more obedient you must be. So that's it. This is lesson 4. So remember this week, most of you may say, I already do that. That's okay. Just take it to another level. But we are practicing radical obedience because, again, delayed obedience is disobedience. So radical obedience meaning we sit, we listen, we do immediately. We sit, we listen, we act, we do immediately. So that's what we're practicing this week. All right. And so our declaration again was, I declare that instead of focusing on being creative, I will focus on being obedient. All right. So that's lesson 4 for this week. And remember, everything else stays the same. Our Bible reading, our scripture writing. This is just something extra if you choose that you want to follow along. Because there's no better place to be than in the secret place. All right. I love you all. I'm so glad you're here. And I will see you all next week for lesson 5.